Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, find the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're looking at something really personal, but also universal, the power of self-love. We'll explore how that interrelationship we have with ourselves really shapes our external world, our health, relationships, even our prosperity. What if, the key to a happier, healthier, more abundant life isn't actually about what's out there, but something deep inside?
Yeah. And what's really fascinating is how fundamental this is. The source material for this deep dive jumps right in, setting the stage. It highlights how our self-image acts as this kind of invisible filter for everything we experience. There's a great quote right at the start from Louise Hay. Happiness is feeling good about yourself. When you don't feel good about yourself, you don't feel good, period. So this deep dive is really going to unpack how that self-perception, that internal view, is maybe the most crucial core complex we possess.
Okay, let's get into that. Our self-image. It sounds like it goes way beyond just, surface confidence. Beyond the obvious self-esteem boost. What's maybe a surprising way a healthy self-image affects us that the source has brought to light?
Well, it's definitely not just about feeling good, though that's part of it. A healthy self-image, the sources say, just makes life significantly easier. You get more confidence, sure, but also more humor, more relaxation, and that genuinely improves how you interact with people if you respect yourself.
Right. Others tend to pick up on that.
Exactly, they respond in kind. But here's something less obvious. It really shapes your career, not just by making you look capable, but by letting you actually access and project your real capabilities. And in relationships, intimate ones, you're more connected to your own power, less likely to fall into those sort of codependent traps.
So a strong self-image sounds like a really profound force for good in life. But what about the flip side? When that self-image is low, the sources list this surprisingly long, extensive list of problems. It always makes it sound like low self-image is the root of everything. Do the sources suggest other primary drivers, or do they really put self-image at the absolute foundation?
They really do position it as foundational. A low self-image is presented as being behind, well, a lot of the malaise affecting people's lives, like
Yeah.
across the board. Now, sure, other factors might play a role, but the core idea here is that self-image is the lens. It's the lens through which other issues are experienced and, magnified. So this can show up as shyness, lack of confidence, not being able to stand up for yourself, underachieving,
Right.
an excessive need to please people, or even what they call poverty consciousness. And that's not just about money. It's this pervasive feeling of lack, of not having enough, not deserving enough, which then, yeah, can show up in your finances.
Right, that makes sense.
Other things mentioned include fear of intimacy, finding it hard to receive things, dependence, jealousy, possessiveness, various addictions, alcohol, drugs, food, whatever. Even things like paranoia, being oversensitive to criticism, needing control, self-destructive patterns, being accident-prone. And this big one, a pervasive victim consciousness, constantly blaming, manipulating, holding on to resentment.
Wow, that victim consciousness idea really hits home. It shows how these unconscious patterns can just completely derail things. The sources use this vivid example, someone named Sheila. Can you share her story? It sounds like it illustrates this well.
Yeah, Sheila's story is a perfect illustration. She always seemed to have, bad luck, especially on holidays, losing passports, money, getting sick, that kind of thing. But the reason she actually went for counseling was a really painful relationship breakup. And as they explored her feelings, it became clear she felt it was all her fault. She lost this man she loved. She was just torturing herself with, if only I hadn't, this or that.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah, and the really fascinating part, her constant need for reassurance, born from that low self-esteem, had actually pushed her partner away. She'd kind of given up her own sense of self in the relationship. So these things, the bad luck, the relationship problems, they weren't random. They were manifestations of her basic lack of self-worth. Unconsciously, deep down, she felt she didn't deserve happiness or good things. The sources call these core complexes. These deep, often unconscious beliefs about ourselves, usually formed early on, and they cause us to just repeat these self-limiting patterns again and again until we finally bring them into conscious awareness, like hidden programs running our lives.
So, okay, if we are sort of creating our experiences through these unconscious core complexes, how do the sources say we can actively, unmake those destructive patterns? How do we build new ones?
Well, this brings us to a really crucial point the sources emphasize. The reality we experience is the sum total of our thoughts. Life acts like a mirror, doesn't it? It just unerringly reflects back where we are internally. If you're negative, you tend to attract negative experiences.
That idea that our reality is the sum of our thoughts. That can be a tough one for people to grapple with, right? Especially when facing huge external difficulties that don't seem directly caused by their thinking. Do the sources acknowledge that complexity, or is it
Uh,
presented more simply?
They do acknowledge external circumstances, absolutely, but the emphasis is squarely on our response to them. The argument is that our internal state determines how we perceive and react to those challenges. So it's less about blaming someone for their hardship and much more about empowering them to change their internal framework, their perspective. They even quote A Course in Miracles, asking this powerful question, would you rather be healthy and happy, or do you want to be right? Which really highlights a choice, doesn't it? Do you cling to those negative patterns even if they feel justified, or do you actively shift towards a mindset that supports well-being?
Being right versus being happy. Okay, so how do we make that internal shift then? How do we actively change our minds?
The answer, according to the verses, lies in consciously reprogramming our mind. They describe the mind as being like this incredibly powerful computer, and they offer two key techniques for this reprogramming. First up, affirmations. The idea is that by making positive statements to ourselves repeatedly and with feeling, we can actually reverse those conditioned negative attitudes.
Right, so it's about consistent positive self-talk. Are there specific kinds of affirmations the sources highlight as being particularly effective? Or maybe common mistakes people make?
Yeah, they emphasize affirmations work best when they're in the present tense, positive, and crucially, you feel them as you say them. It's not just mouthing the words. The classic example given is Emile Coué's famous one from, 70 years ago? Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. Simple but powerful. Other examples could be things like, everything I touch is a success, or I am an attractive, successful, intuitive, loving, and creative human being, or simply, I am enough. A
Yeah.
common mistake is saying them without really believing them, or, saying the affirmation, then immediately thinking a negative thought that cancels it out. It needs consistency and that emotional buy-in.
That makes sense. Consistency in feeling it.
Yeah.
Okay, what other practical tools do the sources offer for this mental reprogramming?
The second key technique is visualizations. This is about using your imagination creatively, deliberately conjuring up mental images of what you want. The sources explain that our minds, interestingly, can't really tell the difference between something actually happening out there in the world and something vividly imagined inside our heads. So the effect on us, physiologically and emotionally, can be the same. This isn't just daydreaming, it's seen as engaging neural pathways, kind of priming the mind and body for that desired reality. And it can affect our moods and even our body's processes pretty deeply.
Can you give us a concrete example? How has visualization been used for something really profound, like, say, physical healing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a well-known example involving Dr. Carl Simonton, an oncologist. He used visualization therapy with a 60-year-old man who had advanced throat cancer. The patient was guided to relax deeply and then visualize. Visualize his cancer cells being attacked by the radiation treatment, visualize his own white blood cells destroying the cancer cells, and then visualize the tumor shrinking and himself returning to vibrant health. After just 2 months of doing this practice consistently, the man showed no signs of cancer.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really illustrates the potential here, doesn't it? Even for what are considered deep-seated and intractable illnesses, it suggests our inner world has this direct line somehow to our physical state.
That's a truly amazing testament to the mind-body connection. The
Mm.
sources stated so clearly, love heals. Just how deep does this connection go between self-love and physical healing?
It seems to go incredibly deep. The sources assert pretty strongly that negative feelings actually poison our bodies. They can manifest as physical illness over time. Dr. Bernie Siegel, who is an assistant clinical professor of surgery at Yale, he states it quite unequivocally. Happy people generally don't get sick. And he calls unconditional love the most powerful known stimulant of the immune system.
The most powerful stimulant. Wow.
Yeah. He believed if he could just teach his patients to truly love themselves and others fully, these measurable positive changes, like in immune globulin levels, killer T cells, they would happen automatically. And the sources go even further, stating explicitly that self-hatred is the most lethal negativity because it directly depresses our immune system, our internal defenses.
That link between self-love or the lack of it and immunity is really striking. A lot of self-help material also talks about forgiveness and healing. Do the sources make that connection too?
Oh, absolutely. It's a central theme. They mention a strong correlation they observe between an unwillingness to forgive, holding on to grudges, and the onset of cancer. Dr. Simonton and his wife, they specifically noted that cancer patients often tended to harbor long-held resentments. And even more dramatically, Professor Siegel quotes these 57 cancer miracles cases of remission where the cure seemed to follow the patient consciously deciding to let go of their anger and depression. After that conscious decision, their tumors actually began to shrink. It suggests letting go isn't just emotional, it's physiological.
So, beyond these really powerful mental and emotional links, affirmations, visualization, forgiveness, how else do the sources suggest we should nourish ourselves? It sounds like it's about more than just diet.
Definitely. It's a very holistic view. Physical nourishment is important, yes. They mention a healthy, mostly vegetarian diet, avoiding excesses. But interestingly, they also connect eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, overeating directly back to low self-image, back to an inability to love oneself unconditionally. So it's about shifting how we relate to food, seeing it as part of emotional and spiritual nourishment too, not just fuel. But beyond food, yeah, the sources highlight other really powerful forms of nourishment. Two stand out.
Okay.
First, emotional and spiritual nourishment. This means consciously surrounding yourself with loving, caring, sensitive people, creating a supportive environment, and
Right.
also allowing yourself to radiate positive energy.
Hmm.
Humor, specifically, is called prophylactic, like it prevents illness. There's this quote from Sir Heneage Ogilvy, a surgeon back in 1957, asserting, "The happy man or woman never gets cancer," which really underlines the protective power of positive emotions.
Interesting. And the second,
The second is the power of rest and relaxation. This is presented as absolutely crucial for recalibrating our nervous system. They talk about the difference between the doing state associated with beta brain waves, that's our busy active mind, and the blissful alpha state, which we reach through deep relaxation. Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, had that great line. We need to lose our minds and come back to our senses. Techniques mentioned include focusing on body sensations, consciously letting muscles relax. It's not just about chilling out, it's actively shifting your brain chemistry into a state that supports healing and creativity.
that distinction between the doing state and the blissful state,
Yeah.
yeah, that resonates. It feels like a real recalibration is needed sometimes. What other ways do the sources suggest we nourish the whole self?
Well, they also mention prayer, suggesting it changes us and reminds us of our connection, our at one-ment with the universe, as they put it. Music gets a specific mention too, especially Baroque and New Age music. It's suggested this kind of music can stimulate the heart center.
The heart.
Yeah, sort of that energetic, emotional core associated with compassion and well-being, and that it can help induce that relaxing alpha state and even lower blood pressure. Exercise is recommended, of course, even massage, things that bring us back into connection with our bodies. And finally, creating a home environment that feels safe, comfortable, welcoming, that's presented as a direct act of self-love, your home as a sanctuary.
We've covered how our self-image acts as a filter, how we can reprogram thoughts, nourish ourselves. But what about when parts of us seem to resist all this? The sources introduce this really intriguing idea that we're not just one single self, but more like a collection of inner characters or subpersonalities. What are these exactly, and why is understanding them so key for self-acceptance?
Right. This draws heavily on Jungian ideas, particularly the concept of the shadow. The shadow represents the disowned parts of ourselves, aspects we find hard to accept, maybe because we were taught they were bad or unlikable, anger, vulnerability, neediness, things like that. The sources argued that until this shadow is brought into the light, into our conscious awareness, no real growth or inner peace is truly possible. The real transformation happens when we can manage to bring ourselves to love the things in us that seem to be totally unlovable. For instance, anger. If we just suppress it, it festers. But if we engage with it, understand it through dialogue, it can transform into healthy strength, our ability to set boundaries, to defend ourselves. It's that idea of going the way through. You have to confront what you fear or dislike inside yourself to integrate it.
So who are some of these main characters, then, that might live inside us?
Oh.
How do they affect our daily lives?
The sources describe several key ones. First, there's the inner child. This is our core of innocence, vulnerability, trust, spontaneity, our feeling self. It fundamentally wants to feel safe, loved, held. If we ignore it, it tends to act up, leading to blaming others, being needy, crying out for attention, maybe even making us sick or sabotaging things we care about. So recognizing and nourishing that child part is vital.
Okay, the inner child. Makes sense. Who else?
Then there's the inner parent controller. This part develops largely to protect the inner child, often by internalizing the shoulds and expectations from parents or other authority figures early on. It can become overly critical, making us feel guilty or paranoid, trying to manage everything perfectly. The key here isn't to get rid of it, but to understand the underlying feeling driving it, which is usually fear. Fear for the child's safety. If we address the fear, the controller can relax and become more of a supportive guide.
Right. And there was another one mentioned.
Yes, the pleaser. This is the part that constantly seeks approval from others. It makes us prioritize everyone else's needs, often sacrificing our own, which drains our energy. Pleasers find it really hard to say no, and because of that, they can build up a lot of hidden anger and resentment. The crucial shift for the pleaser is learning to please ourselves first. Recognizing that genuine connection comes from being authentic, not just trying to appease everyone.
It really does sound like a complex inner world, almost like managing a committee
Right.
or, yeah, a cast of characters in a play. How can we actually talk to these different parts? The sources mentioned a few therapeutic approaches for this kind of inner dialogue.
Yeah, there are several helpful techniques. Transactional analysis, or TA, looks at how we interact from different ego states, parent, adult, or child. Understanding which state you're in can be really illuminating. Gestalt therapy, from Fritz Perls, famously uses techniques like the empty chair, or dialogues between the top dog, the critical part, and the underdog, the rebellious or victim part. You literally give voice to these parts to bring unconscious motivations out into the open. It focuses less on why we do things and more on how we do them in the present moment.
And the sources seem particularly keen on a technique called voice dialogue. How does that work? It sounded quite sophisticated.
Yes, voice dialogue. It was developed by doctors Hal Stone and Sidra Winkleman, and it's described as deceptively simple but really powerful. It actually grew out of an argument they were having. Sidra noticed Hal wasn't just arguing. His tone and body language had shifted into this sulky, plaintive child. So instead of trying to win the argument, she consciously shifted her own energy and started talking to that hurt child part in him from the space of what she called a good mother.
Wow, in the middle of an argument.
Right. And it worked. It allowed Hal to express these deep insecurities and needs that were fueling the argument, but in a safe, held way. The absolute key to voice dialogue is acceptance. No judgment of the different subpersonalities. You approach them with curiosity. It helps us become really conscious of our internal pleasers, critics, drivers, perfectionists, all these parts. We learn what they do for us, but also what they truly need to feel secure and cooperate. This allows us to move towards what they call an aware ego, being able to choose our responses consciously rather than being run by these unconscious parts. It's like becoming the conductor of your inner orchestra.
Becoming the conductor. I like that. Befriending your inner family, conducting the orchestra. It really sounds like understanding these dynamics is the first step to truly, as the sources say, staying in charge of your life. So what does it mean then to fully acknowledge and step into our personal power?
The sources use this wonderful analogy where, like a tiger who somehow grew up believing he was a sheep, lived with sheep, acted like a sheep, until one day he sees his reflection in the water and realizes his true nature. That moment, that enlightenment experience, is about knowing who you really are deep down, a creative, powerful, self-determining being, and trusting your inherent capacity to respond effectively to whatever life throws your way. It's moving from feeling like life happens to you to knowing you happen to life.
And a really crucial part of that shift seems to be moving from being a victim to being at cause. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, precisely. Victim consciousness is that feeling of having no choice. It's the mindset behind phrases like, "you made me feel," or "look what happened to me." The sources are very clear on this. Nobody else has the power to make us feel anything. Our feelings are our feelings. We choose our responses. So taking responsibility for our own experience, not blame, but responsibility is key. Asking, okay, this is the situation. Now what am I going to do about it? Instead of why me? That question puts you back in the driver's seat. The idea is what we unconsciously create through our beliefs and patterns, we can consciously uncreate by changing those beliefs and patterns. It's about reclaiming your agency.
So being really clear about what we actually want seems absolutely essential then, to avoid just, drifting or frittering away energy and confusion.
Exactly. Clarity is power. And the sources introduce this specific technique they call the creative law for manifesting what you need, not just want, but need. It's presented as more than just wishful thinking. It's a kind of structured process rooted in deep belief and intention. It involves, first, a really clear, detailed intention. Know exactly what you're asking for, maybe even set a time limit. Second, cultivate this profound faith that it's already on its way. Trust the process. Third, generate intense expectation. Feel it, anticipate it, almost like it's already here. And fourth, when it manifests, express genuine, heartfelt gratitude. An interesting point they make is not to specify how it should come. Leave the how to the universe or your guardian angel or fate, as they put it. But, and this is crucial, always check that your creation won't harm anyone else. It needs to align with a sense of overall good.
That's a really interesting, almost spiritual framework for manifestation. And this idea of attracting what we need, it sounds like it extends directly into financial well-being too. The sources had that compelling section on prosperity consciousness.
Oh, absolutely. It connects directly. The sources state very clearly feeling rich is not being rich. You can have piles of money and still feel constantly anxious and impoverished inside. Or you can have relatively little materially, but feel incredibly abundant and enjoy life fully. Money, like everything else in this view, is energy. And the amount of money we attract to ourselves is related to where we ourselves are at and our level of self-esteem.
Hmm.
They share this anecdote about a very wealthy friend, Martin. Owned lots of property, vineyards, a fancy penthouse near Harrods in London. But despite all that wealth, he was constantly worried, agonizing over investments, questioning his financial judgment. He felt poor and insecure despite the objective reality. It really highlights that money itself isn't the only form of wealth. True prosperity is presented as an inner state, a feeling of abundance and trust.
So how do we cultivate that inner state then, that prosperity consciousness?
Well, first, you have to stop thinking like a beggar, as they put it. Stop the constant worrying about money, complaining about prices, comparing yourself negatively to others who seem to have more. Instead, you need to consciously train your mind to think like an emperor. This means acting as if you are already abundant. Not being reckless, but making choices from a place of worthiness, not scarcity. Maybe choosing quality over the absolute cheapest option sometimes, because you value yourself and trust that resources will flow. Ultimately, the sources suggest money tends to follow the project, meaning if you focus on your purpose, your creativity, on serving a genuine need, the resources tend to flow to support that. It's less about chasing money for its own sake, and more about aligning with value and purpose.
This has been such a rich deep dive. It really feels like it all comes back to that core idea. Our inner world truly is the architect of our outer experience. From our self-image shaping everything to our thoughts having creative power to understanding that whole inner cast of characters. It all points back to the profound importance of being our own best friend.
Exactly. And if we zoom out for a second, the sources connect this personal work to a bigger picture. They suggest we're living in a time of significant transformation, moving towards what some call an Aquarian age. Now, for those not familiar, this concept, often found in spiritual or astrological thought, points to a coming era focused on individual self-responsibility, heightened conscious awareness, humanitarian values, that kind of thing. It's seen as an age where doing this inner work, taking responsibility for ourselves, is really paramount. It reminds me of that Lao Tzu quote mentioned, "Love the world as your own self, then you can truly care for all things." The idea is, as we each patiently work on becoming more aware, more loving towards ourselves, that consciousness just naturally ripples outward. It changes the collective.
And maybe the most powerful and definitely provocative thought to leave everyone with today comes from Buddha's supposed last words. Be light unto yourself.
Because, as this source material concludes, really provocatively, the truth is that we are special. Either we all are or nobody is. We are all, every single one of us, unique, special, amazing, and magnificent. And that includes you.
So perhaps the invitation today is to consider just one small, consistent step you could take, something you could start today to truly be your own best friend and start shining that light.